okay, if they're removed as the trustee and now it's quote permanent, everything in the trust is now off the table in terms of finances. So if most of your assets are in the trust, yeah, they can go and change their power of attorney. Yeah, they can go and change their healthcare power of attorney. But the greatest part of the funds are now in the hands of the trustee that they picked when they were in much more of a right state of mind.
Hi, Jeff Marsace, the Plain English Attorney, and welcome to the video. This is going to be put out in 3 parts, and this is actually an interview that was done with HD Reach on some very important topics regarding Huntington's disease, planning ahead, and trying to make sure that you're not losing everything for your loved one to get the care that they need. Now, the reason this is going to be put out in 3 parts is, honestly, we just need a little bit of time. We've got a big conference coming up that I'm presenting at. We've got a new book that's just about there and ready to launch. So we're going to need some time. So the video over the next 3 weeks is going to be this interview. And then after that, we hope to get back to a more steady flow of fresh content every week. So please enjoy the video and look for the book launch soon of the Divorce Firewall Strategy.
Hey everyone, my name is Erica Belofsky. I am the Community Outreach Specialist with HD Reach, and I am here with my co-host,
Lauren Holder with Help for HD.
And we are here with Jeffrey Marsace, the Plain English Attorney, which I love that name. I think it's perfect.
Well, thank you.
You want to tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, my name is Jeff Marsace. I am the Plain English Attorney. I've got a YouTube channel. You know, a lot of attorneys, they really just kind of focus on the law. Part of what I do, which I think makes me a little bit different, is I focus an awful lot on education and helping my clients understand things that are going on. And if I have to tell the story of how I got into this, it goes all the way back to when I was 9 years old. My mom passed on from cancer, and that's when my father's parents, my grandmother and grandfather, they just moved in, helped raise me and my sister. There was just no question. And so we got through high school, and I went away, did undergrad, and then that summer between undergrad and law school, my grandfather ended up passing on, also of cancer. Only about a week and a half before I was supposed to shove everything into the car and drive off to law school. And my grandmother, you know, it hit her hard. It did. And immediately she knew that there were some things going wrong with the estate because there were all of these, questions. And she's like, wait a minute, what's going on? Being a proud grandmother with a grandson in law school, she's like, I can call up my grandson. And of course, with everything she did, she earned the right. So she gave me 1 day for orientation and then started calling up and asking questions. If you ask any question of any first-year law student, you're very likely to get the exact same answer, no matter what the question is. And that's, I don't know, let me look it up in the law library. So she kept calling me, and the reason she was calling me is every time she talked to the attorney, she would get an answer she didn't understand and a bill that she didn't want to pay. So I was trying to help her understand. It's a year and a half later, and I find that the questions are still coming. I'm like, wait a minute, this is still going on? It can't have to be like this when someone passes on. There's got to be a way to plan ahead to avoid all this. And I finally went to the head librarian at the law school, and he said, I know exactly the book you need. We don't have it. And he sent me over to the mall bookstore to pick it up. And it was this book called The Living Trust by Henry W. Apps III. And it started laying out, here is a different and better way than having everything go into probate court. And I think that really is what sparked the fire in me to help clients avoid messes by planning ahead of time. That became my focus rather than, okay, let's help people clean up messes and charge an awful lot of money to do it.
If you think it's important for educational videos like this to get out there, then please help us out by subscribing to the channel.
So that's how I got into what I'm doing. And now that branched into also Medicaid planner. I'm a certified Medicaid planner as well. So I can really help the family save a lot of money while still qualifying their loved one for those benefits if that's what they need.
Yeah. I know we were talking a little bit before about how complex Huntington's disease, or just a longer term illness. How planning is really important to do, and it's really important to be able to look at a lot of these questions that we go through, this conversation that we have, to really consider and think about, like, is this something that I really need to go ahead and get started on, while also acknowledging, if you are in the middle of a mess, there are still people that can help guide you and help kind of make that mess a little less messy.
Yes, definitely.
Like I said, I'm so excited that you're here today, because this is when life gets messy. This is kind of our intent with this specific webinar. We want to talk about prevention and talk about planning and talk about different things that people who have the time to set up for their futures in different ways. How can they do that? But also when they're in the midst of the mess, when they're making decisions and they're having to make real important decisions financially regarding Medicaid, what that can look like. If you can, like, I know you said that you're an estate and Medicaid kind of focused attorney. What is that, how is that different from like a family planning attorney or a family law, a disability attorney? Like, I feel like there's a million different attorneys.
Well, yeah, there are. And it's an awful lot like medicine these days, in that I don't want to say specialized. There's actually a process for specializing attorneys and whatnot, but people focus on what they're focused on because the rules get to be really, really complex. In fact, even with estate planning and probate attorneys end up handling estates that go through the court system, and that's kind of what happens if you do a will as opposed to a trust to avoid it. Most of them don't want to touch Medicaid planning because it's a whole other level of rules and exceptions and loopholes and gotcha things that can really devastate it. And it's like, unless they want to devote a lot of time to be in there, they don't want to take that stuff on, and they don't want to take the responsibility on it. When you're talking about family law, all right, family law is generally, a big portion of it ends up being divorce, but it's also adoptions, child custody. If someone is becoming incapacitated or incompetent legally and they need a guardian, oftentimes if it's under the family law umbrella, they will help get guardianship. And some of that ventures a little bit over to the estate side, because if you get financial guardianship over someone through the court, you have to report to the court and fill out accounting forms and things like that. Again, a lot of that, I like to try to help my clients avoid it if at all possible. And so this is just I guess it's a tidbit, and it's a little more generally applicable. It's around this time of year for a lot of my clients, just if their kids are turning 18 and they're heading off to college, and the college is requesting their medical records, they go to the pediatrician that they've been going to for the last 18 years and request the medical records. And suddenly the parents are like, well, I'm sorry, we can't give it to you. What are you talking about? It's my kid. I've been bringing them here for 18. Yeah, but they're 18 now. They're an adult. So the parents aren't automatically going to be able to do a lot of things that they were automatically able to do just 6 months ago when they were still 17. Mm-hmm. So for anyone who's a legal adult, having I call it a financial power of attorney. There's a durable general power of attorney, springing. Basically, it's anything financial and legal. Have a power of attorney and also a healthcare power of attorney. And sometimes, okay, if you want, then there's also that living will, which is, all right, if I get on life support, what's that final decision? So even if you have next to nothing in terms of assets, well, it's not like I have dependents and I need to do all this other type of planning. At the very least, have those two powers of attorney so it doesn't become a mess. I remember it's got to be going back about 3 years ago now. Some high school senior was doing something stupid. They were standing on top of a car and like surfing on top of the car. You know what I'm talking about? And they fell off and hit their head. And the parents were divorced. And the father was overseas and they couldn't get a hold of him. And the mom's like, look, I know that he wouldn't want to be on life support. And the doctors were like, no, because he's 18. He couldn't assign somebody as the power of attorney. We need both parents to agree or we're not going to do anything. So there can be crises like that. But on the financial end, I have a ton of my clients whose parents just want to help them out with banking stuff while they're away. So having those two documents becomes important. It becomes all that more critical if, say, you're a young adult and HD runs in the family, or you actually get diagnosed. That's at a bare minimum the documents you want to have in place so the people that you're choosing are taking over, rather than there either being a fight or just, quote, going to the next of kin, whom you may not want to be the person in charge.
I think that is incredibly important to state where, you know, there's natural next of kin. There's a hierarchy, and you may be going through a couple of those hierarchies before it's actually the person that you actually want, who you've had these conversations with and talked about your health. It may not be, you know, your spouse might be very emotionally invested, and there might be a friend that has been that sounding board that you've talked to. So having that healthcare power of attorney puts that healthcare, when you're not able to make decisions yourself, it puts that into the hands of that person, that trusted person.
And that's always the better alternative if you are making the choice yourself for the people you want in charge. I have a lot of clients who are parents of children with special needs, and they're adults. And okay, well, they can work, but they can only work so long because they have a disability and Medicaid. And so there's only so many hours, and really there's only so much pay that they can have in their checking account at the end of whatever that month is. But they can kind of make these decisions on their own, and they go, oh, well, I went to the bank. They wouldn't let me help my child, and they said to go get guardianship. Oh, wait a minute. The second there's guardianship involved, that could mean having to go and report to the court each year. Well, the test for seeing if someone can execute their own legal documents, do they know who they are? Do they know who they're the natural heirs of their bounty, if they've got kids or not, and when were they born and whatnot, and basically what do they have and where would they want it to go. They have something called testamentary capacity, which really that's the test. Okay, you can have that power of attorney, you can create a will, you can create a plan. Well, if they have that and they can voluntarily pick those people out, and you can use the power of attorney at the bank, why would you go through a court process? So it's these alternatives of planning ahead that can be much more efficient and certainly a lot less frustrating than having to go to a court to do it. But I see so many people just jump to, oh, I was told to go get guardianship, so that's what I did.
I think that this is a little bit of a harder thing. And the reason I say this is because I've been through this process. I think you make a very great point that if you are being proactive and you go ahead and get those documents taken care of ahead of time, it saves you a lot of heartache and everything when you're faced with a situation versus when you're in a situation and because of cognitive problems and the behavioral issues, along with those cognitive issues that we deal with HD, you all of a sudden have to look at guardianship because there's no other choice. And so, it's heartbreaking to have to do that, but sometimes that is necessary. But you're right. I think if we're proactive, we go ahead and get the power of attorney in place, then that doesn't become an issue. But I do want people to realize too, like if you're in the midst of somebody who is dealing with the behavioral and cognitive symptoms and you are faced with guardianship, it's okay to go down that road as well if you're there.
Yeah. Now, the other thing too, and this is also an important distinction because I do an awful lot with revocable living trusts, again, as a way to avoid probate or during life. Guardianship is something we call living probate,
Mhm.
where you have to report all those finances. Well, look, if you've got finances and you're putting it into a revocable living trust, you're naming your trustees. Those assets don't become part of that guardianship. And I've worked with enough families where the person setting up the trust has HD, and there is that kind of cognitive shift. They can become wildly irresponsible, but they wouldn't technically be incompetent under the law. So we put very specific triggering language for what it would take to remove them as the trustee from their own trust threshold in the law, acknowledging, hey, this is something that happens. And if a doctor just didn't know anything about HD, just examine them, they'd say, oh yeah, they're legally competent. But we don't want them in charge of the money at that point.
Mhm.
So I've had clients, they met that threshold and they were able to step in as the trustee and take over the finances, even though they weren't, quote, legally incompetent and not able to do it themselves. There was that acknowledgement that it's not the best thing for them to handle it themselves.
Absolutely.
I think that was going to go back to another question where I had, like, if you, so let's say this, this family, this couple, like this individual went ahead and, they did everything right in the beginning and they've planned it out and they have their documents. And you start to have somebody who is starting to become symptomatic, is starting to have impulsivity, is starting to maybe a little bit of paranoia. So you're experiencing some of the mental health aspect of HD popping in and going, I maybe, in this mode, like I need to go ahead and change my information and change my documents. And they may want to change it to, the person who's there temporarily or in that moment. You navigate a situation like that. So I know that gets very,
yeah. If they
sticky.
have that, if there's that language in there that they're removed as their own trustee, and yet they still have the capacity to change their other documents. Okay, if they're removed as the trustee and now it's, quote, permanent,
Mhm.
everything in the trust is now off the table in terms of finances. So if most of your assets are in the trust, yeah, they can go and change their power of attorney. Yeah, they can go and change their healthcare power of attorney. But the greatest part of the funds are now in the hands of the trustee that they picked when they were in much more of a right state of mind to make those kind of decisions.
I go a little forward really quick. Does that
Mhm.
play a role too when it comes to living wills? So, if somebody has a living will set up, but then, and they have very strict guidelines as to how they want things to go, but later on they change their mind and they're capable, I guess, of making that decision. Are they still able to do it?
Yeah, they're still able to change their minds on those things. And now let me talk, there's a legal and a practical. Now, the living will, it's technically, North Carolina calls it a declaration of a desire for a natural death. And they have the old form, which is really the one that I still use. It's just that question regarding life support and artificial nutrition. If you're terminal and incurable, you're in a persistent vegetative state. And I always put in that 2 attending physicians have to make that determination, meaning 2 doctors have to actually examine you, not one doctor who turns their notes over to another and says, here, sign here. 2, they have to examine you. Then that's it. That decision's made. There's the new living will, which has, okay, you can choose this, and we have this for this situation and whatnot. And I've always kind of seen that as being more inflexible and really something that you want your healthcare power of attorney agent to take over and make those decisions. So the living will, once it's in place, it's in place. But if you come out and say, forget it, I don't want it anymore, keep me hooked up to the machines as long as possible. Now we get to the practical part of that answer. which is no doctor, if you can communicate that you want to stay off, stay on the life support, they will keep you on it because they don't want a lawsuit. So living will or not, if there's that indication, they're going to err on the side of keeping you alive. So yes, you
Very
can
good to
change
know.
your mind on that.
And within the state of North Carolina, and I'm assuming some other states, they have the living will or a form similar to it, that trumps the healthcare power of attorney. Is that correct?
Yes, because it's a very specific type of thing. Now, the way North Carolina does it is, I believe it's the way most states do it. You're making your decision ahead of time. There are some states that have a living will, but they specifically name a person who has to sign off on withdrawing the life support and artificial nutrition. And back in law school, I went to law school in New York. That was what it was. You had your healthcare power of attorney, but you also named someone who could withdraw the life support. And unfortunately, one of my really good friends in undergrad, it was her father that went through this at the time, just after we both ended up graduating from different law schools. He named his wife to be his healthcare power of attorney, but he knew there was no way that she would pull the plug. And he picked my friend instead to do that. So yeah, she made the logical, reasoned choice with everything input, even though it was her father. And when the time came, she signed the paperwork to have him let go.